this lesson, we will talk about lists and tuples. We already learned how to assign values to variables, and so far, we worked with strings and numbers, which could be enough to do anything we want with a computer program. However, what happens when we have a set of information, like a list of students? So let's create a new variable, and let's put inside a string. Now, how many students do I have? What's the name of the first student? How can I add a new student to that list? How can I remove a student? Those are some examples of trivial things we would want to do with our data, but would be really hard if it was stored as a string. In Python, we can use lists and tuples to solve that problem. In other programming languages, they are commonly called arrays. So let's change the type of this variable. And to create a list, we use braces. So let's put the same names: John, Mary, and Steve. Now let's get the type of this variable. And as we can see, this is now a list. Tuples are very similar. The only difference is that they are immutable. I will talk about them in a moment. Now that we have a list, all the operations I just said are really easy to perform. How many students do I have? We can get it from the len function, which will return the number of elements in a list. So if I do like this, len students, it returns 3. What's the name of the first student? You can just do student and get the index 0. Like strings, lists and tuples are also sequences, and their elements can be of any data type. We can have a list of strings, like the one we have now. We can have a list of numbers. We can have a list of strings and numbers. We can even have a list of lists, and so on. So now a quick challenge for you. Can you get the name of the last student? How about the names of the first 2 students? Just try it out and then get back here when you're done. So for the last student, we can use the -1 index. And for the first 2 students, we can go from 0, that we can just omit. And then this is index 0. This is index 1. So we just put 2 here because the second number is not included. So if we do it, it's gonna get us the first 2 students. Now let's talk about tuples. Tuples are like lists, but they are immutable. So let's say I want to store the months of the year. I could use a list, but are they gonna change ever? Probably not. So in this case, it's better to use a tuple that is represented by parentheses. So months So January, February, March, and so on. I'm not going to continue this because this was just an example. So if I get the type of the variable months, so now we see that the type of this variable is a tuple. This means we can't add or remove or change any element from it anymore. But we could get a value from it the same way we do with lists. So if I just get the index 0, it's going to return January. So could I use a list to store the months of the year? Sure, but using a tuple is safer because we make sure it won't be changed later, even by accident, which could happen in a complex program. It is important to know that strings are also immutable. So with strings and tuples, we can get the size of them, we can get specific elements, but we can't add, remove, or change elements. But those things are possible with lists. So now let's see what we had in the students variable. Now let's try to change the first element. So let's put students, index 0. Now let's use the equal sign. And let's assign a new value. So for instance, George. Now we were able to change an element of that list. If we try to do it with the tuple, let's see what happens. And we get an error in return. We can also add elements to the list by using the append method. So let's add a new student. So let's just type students and then use the append method, which is like a function. So we're going to pass an argument here, which is the student we want to add. Now Kate has been added to the end of the list. We can also add elements anywhere we want in the list. So for example, in the beginning of the list, we would do students. And then we can use the insert method, which accepts two arguments. The first one is the position in the list, so 0. And the second argument is the item we want to add to the list. So let's try Peter. And now we added Peter to the first element of the list, and all the other items have been pushed one position. We can also remove elements from a list using the pop method. So students.pop. It just removed Kate, which is the last element of the list. Now, if we print it again, we can see that Kate is out. Since we passed no arguments, the last element is removed by default. But we can also pass an index. So students.pop. And now let's try to delete George. His index is 1. And now George has been removed. We can also remove specific elements using the remove method. We say that we want to remove Mary. Let's see what happened. And now Mary is out of the list. Be careful because you know that Python is case sensitive. In case we had 2 Marys in the list, only the first one would have been removed. Another interesting thing we can do is merging 2 lists. So let's say we have a second list of students. So we have students and students 2. We can just use the plus sign, so students plus students 2, and then it merges the 2 lists. You can do the same thing with tuples, but you can't merge a list with a tuple. We're going to use lists and tuples a lot in our programs in the next lessons, and we will learn more interesting things we can do with them. For now, that was all. I'll see you later.